Good afternoon. It's an honor to be here with you all today. So thank you. And to my esteemed co-panelists, I have deep respect for you all. My name is Michelle Harper, and I wrote the memoir, The Beauty in Breaking. And this memoir explores journeys of healing and the possibilities therein from the challenges that life will most certainly throw at us. And I understood that viscerally as a child, growing up in a violent, unstable household with a batterer for a father. And so early I learned what it took to survive. Often I would just have a snapshot in time, just a moment to do a risk assessment. And in that moment, I would have to decide, is there danger right now? Do myself, my mother, my brother, my sister, do we have to make an intervention to live right now? Or perhaps it's not so dangerous, it'll just blow over. Just need to give it a little time. Or maybe this is actually a moment of relative calm. So it turns out this is the exact skill set I would need years later as an ER doctor. And so I realized in my youth that spaces that house us may not actually be home, that people and institutions that are supposed to protect us may just be experiences that must be survived. And one day, somehow, without knowing what it looks like beyond survival, I would have to figure out what it is to live. And then one day I did get a glimpse of it. One day when my brother was protecting my mother from my father beating her, which could have been any day. But this day, my brother was injured, which also could have been one of various days. But on this day, I was a teenager just learning to drive and I had my permit. So I drove my brother to the ER when he needed care. And when we got there, I saw all manner of life converging in this space as I waited for him. And whether or not it was a homeless man who just needed a couple hours respite from the elements, a safe, warm, dry place to rest, or a little girl who came in crying, carried in because she had a cut on her leg, and then later emerges skipping and laughing with her dad because she's all fixed, or a man presumably in cardiac arrest because there are paramedics pumping oxygen into his lungs, thumping his chest to circulate his blood. And then family members that I see streaming in, and one way or another, with or without them, they too will have to figure out the next chapters of their lives. And there was something special in seeing our interconnectedness as humans, something special in realizing that I wasn't alone, that we we're in this together, this mission of healing, knowing that after the breaking, it is possible to mend if we choose it. And if there are people there who will offer assistance, even if it's just a stranger in the ER for an hour or for the duration of her shift. So I chose it. And when I grew up and became an emergency medicine physician, I could not look away. I could not unknow or unhear the experiences of my patients nor myself. Like the day they brought him into the department in chains, I was at my station doing work and I heard behind me voices arguing. And it's an ER, right? So there's always commotion in the ER. There's always yelling, whether it's from pain, surprise, um, anger, sometimes joy. I mean, just sometimes joy. But this this was a little different because this was a man shouting, proclaiming his innocence. And after that, I heard clanking. So when I turned around to see what was going on, I saw a Black man in chains bound around his ankles and his wrists. And it was the shackles that shook me. And he couldn't have been taller than 5'9", and he was slender. So the four officers that brought him in truly seemed to be overkill. I was the only attending physician in the ER in my section at that time. The other physician, a white woman named Lauren, was my resident. So she was my trainee. And before I could finish up my paperwork, she got up and went over to address the situation. And I overheard the police telling the triage nurse, that the patient, Mr. Dominic Thomas, had swallowed bags of drugs. So they brought him here to get the bags out. Mr. Thomas refuted these allegations, and he communicated that that didn't happen, and he didn't want to be in the ER. He didn't want to be evaluated or treated or whatever else it was we were planning to do. He wanted to leave. At which point I heard Lauren tell him that the decision was not his and that he would do as he was directed. Okay, so never mind the fact that it is unethical and illegal to force an examination on a competent adult. And never mind the risks to him if we chose to use force anyway. So I got up and I went over and I introduced myself to Mr. Thomas and to the police as the physician in charge. And after a brief discussion with Mr. Thomas confirming his wishes, I let Mr. Thomas know, and the police and everyone, that I would be discharging him from the emergency department in accordance with his wishes. Well, Lauren, my trainee, did not believe me when I asserted that this man with skin like mine was our patient, so he was our priority. She did not believe that he had personal sovereignty, nor did she believe that I had the authority to make such a decision. So she invoked who she felt would be a higher authority, and she called the hospital department of legal and ethics to see if she could override my order. And as I sat back down at my station to prepare Mr. Thomas's paperwork so he could leave, the administrators did call her back, and they did confirm to her that yes, in fact, I did have such authority and I was correct. And I wrote the draft of this chapters year before the summer of 2020, the epic that so far has made it a little less controversial to assert that a Black life does indeed matter. Before Derek Chauvin murdering George Floyd was televised to the world. And I heard others, like Miss Victoria Honor, the young woman who was a member of the armed services, who I encountered in the psychiatric division of the emergency department at the VA hospital. She was coming in for medical clearance. So it's medical clearance. Well, when a patient who is pursuing further mental health treatment comes in and they just need a medical doctor to sign off saying there's no acute medical issue that would interfere with such treatment. And she went on to explain to me that she needed help. She needed more care to heal from trauma she sustained in the Army. The trauma of her colleagues, one supervisor and one peer, raping her. And then after that crime that they committed against her body and her spirit, the military went on to try to ruin her career and take away her livelihood. Now, thankfully, she had since been reassigned to a new team who removed those false allegations from her record and restored her in good standing professionally. And now she was here with me in the emergency department, doing the rest of the hard work to save herself. And I couldn't not tell this story, because while people like Miss Honor are understandably fighting for their lives and using every last bit of energy they have to do so, I feel it's up to me and people like me, with the privilege, at least for now, of health and safety, the luxury of shelter and food, to fight the battles of justice so that the norm is that people are not criminalized for the color of their skin, that they are not tortured and otherwise disenfranchised because of their gender or sex. And that story, the story of Miss Honor, was drafted before the Me Too movement was popularized, years before they killed Vanessa Guillen. Because these themes, tragically, have always run through the fabric of this nation and will continue to do so unless and until we choose a different course. The choice to do better and be better is yet another blessing of healing. And I chose it. I chose this path to stand with Dominique Thomas, with Victoria Honor, with resilience, with equality, healing, and health. And it always feels a little funny to me when people comment on my memoir on how it's so intimate and vulnerable, and the bravery it certainly took for me to discuss my personal life. And I'm not gonna lie, I'm gonna be honest with you. To this day, it's still a little cringy when I think about these chapters that I wrote in the middle of the night with vanilla scented candles and incense and ambient music playing in the background, that I explored as meditations on my own childhood trauma and then later divorce and then other breakup. That all of this would now be topics for me to discuss on interviews across the nation. Because I had done that thing that apparently is quite popular with private people and relatively introverted people. Of course, I wrote a memoir. but but I will say that for me, since these themes are universal, and because this book was birthed out of the mission to serve healing, in my mind, it never registered as personal. So for me, it always felt like the type of project that requires just enough courage to be curious and human publicly. Thank you.